Our guest today is James J. Claffey. James is the current UCD AFC sports psychologist. After completing a master's degree in sports and exercise psychology, James is now an experienced course director and lecturer with a HDip in psychology and clinical psychology.
There's things going on with you, and you don't need to be a sports psych to do that. You just need to be a person, and a person who cares.
As he's completing his PhD in human performance psychology, James is with us today to discuss human performance, mental wellness in sport, and tools to aid performance in any field. For any player wishing to inquire about James's services, please get in touch with the Training121 team. We hope you enjoy. Welcome, James Claffey. Amazing to have you here, sir.
Thank you.
A little bit different to the standard podcast with the short form questions and anything along those lines. I think with a guest of this sort of caliber with specific knowledge, I think it's quite important to delve into topics and maximize the time. So straight into it. And originally, I think when I showed this, James, I forgot to say as well with the iPad, I thought of a question in the car because I was listening to your previous podcast with Dan Abraham. And one of the differences was really just in the academic field. But I think a good way to kick it off would be, what's the difference between clinical psychology and sports psychology at a high level?
Well, I suppose actually what you'd see a lot with clinical-based psychology would be probably leaning towards the mental health side of things, looking at maybe different elements of mental illness as well as mental health and everything else. So clinical-based psychology is always something that every sports psychologist should look into. It's almost like a foundation or a base like you'd have as a concrete for a house, and we'll give you the kind of platform then to build into sport, exercise, performance psychology, because really there's very few times you're ever going to study sports psychology by itself. So you're kind of looking at sport, exercise, and now past 10 years, past 15 years, you're hearing performance-based psychology as well. So everything that we're doing on a day-to-day basis is a performance. Sitting here, all right, we're not being examined for the podcast, but we're probably going to be evaluated. People are going to look at, view it, and evaluate us. So sports psychology probably encapsulates performance, because actually everything we do within sports is performance based, whether that's diet, nutrition, etc. So I think to answer your question a long way around it is that the clinical psychology gives you a base and a really good knowledge base to be able to deal with stuff then at a high level of sport as well, but probably most facets of sport, because before anybody is an elite athlete or a professional sports athlete, they're a person, and person first, athlete second.
Yeah, which was the foundation of that conversation with Dan as well. And when it comes to the importance of sports psychology with performance, where do you see its impact in sports in general, even on that topic of, let's say, people before athlete as well?
Look, it's one of them where I suppose contemplating the conversation before I even came in here tonight, I was kind of thinking, if I was to say to you guys, what way would you break down sport? How much of a percentage would you put mental and how much of it would you put physical? And obviously being involved within soccer, maybe that's something that, you know, I'd love to hear your opinions on it. What do you think? Soccer, what percentage is physical and what percentage is mental?
I would say, and I think the biggest thing that highlighted this to me was, if you think during the lockdown, football, how many mental results there were. I remember like Villa beat Liverpool and all, and some people were arguing it was the crowd isn't there, so there's no less crowd pressure. So the top players, it's not that they're technically much better than the, let's say, the Aston Villa players in this case, or I think it was the Liverpool. It's just that the Liverpool top players can handle the pressure, which would obviously be a psychological thing. So I think at the very top in particular, I think it's, as a percentage, I put like it separates the best players. Like I'd be over 50%, like in that sense, because that was kind of key to me. I remember when I seen that, and I think I seen someone explain it on Twitter, going, it's probably because there's no crowd and they're able to perform better, so to speak, compared to the top players who can do it to that level with the crowd there hating them sometimes.
Absolutely. And I mean, within psychology, there's a inverted U hypothesis, without getting into it, but it's exactly that. It's exactly explaining that. It's talking about how athletes at different levels, they need to have a certain level of arousal, and some athletes need that crowd there. If you think about like the FA Cup historically, giant killings, how does it happen? Well, you know, Shrewsbury Town probably shouldn't be beating a Man City, let's say, for example, but because the Man City lads are probably coming to a stadium, probably not what they're used to, whatever it is, their level of arousal is probably, we'll come in, we'll get the win, we'll get home. So they're not really present in what they're doing, and their level of arousal for their performance probably isn't where it should be. Now, the flip side of that is the Shrewsbury Town lads might be in a situation where they're over-roused and 3 minutes in, red card. So you have to win your tackles. You have to all of these perpetuations and end up going out maybe committing a foul or doing something that's silly then again. What about you, Gar? What do you think percentage-wise? If I pushed you on it, what are we talking percentage-wise, mental versus physical? On the spot here.
To be honest with you, I'm spot on the same opinion of Gary at professional level. I think there is some players. I think the biggest transition for any player that I've seen definitely is from, let's say, child to adult, because I think when you're a child, physicality definitely wins out, and I think that's because players at a younger age play with no fear, whereas when they're a professional, it's all about coming back to their child, really. Why did they fall in love with the game, and really trying to unlock that side. And even from any sort of like research or reading that I've done, a lot of it points to, let's say, the top performers, like let's say Cristiano Ronaldo, Messi, for example, or Neymar. These people play with a real level of like healthy disrespect and respect for their person and their being, compared to, like, say, the athlete version. And I think that definitely seems to be like the magic mix. So I definitely think for professional players on the mental side, I would definitely say, I'd say it's about 75. I'd say
80, 20.
I'd say about 75. Yeah, I think there's a lot of top players, and even in our off season and stuff, it was great. Obviously, in the last podcast, I was talking about me being a ref, so it was a bit different to coaching. I was in and amongst it, but I mean, like, technically, the players aren't a million miles off each other. The real question I was having is, you know, who's going to be able to get dropped, get released, and then pick themselves up again in the next couple of years? And I guarantee you, half these players aren't even having these conversations with other people, yet alone themselves, which is frightening.
Yeah, and I mean, I love what you said there, because I think the reality is it's so often people, we get caught in that kind of, I would say, autopilot, where we're just allowing things to happen. And I think players who are maybe in a situation where they're playing for contracts, or they're in a day-to-day where there's pressure, stress, whatever it may be, I think a lot of the time the best ones are the ones that are going to go the furthest. They're the ones that have the ability to press pause, the ones who have time to reflect, the ones who might journal how they're feeling, what's their emotions, what's their thoughts, why am I feeling that way? You mentioned the Dan Abrams podcast before, and I'm always saying to players, like, how are you feeling today? Measure it out of a 10. You know, I've been kind of quoted on saying this before, like, and you'll notice actually if you're journaling this, that when you're on a 2 or when you're on a 3, you probably feel like, oh, I'm never going to get out of this. But actually, if you've journaled it the week before, you were on a 2 and you probably felt the same. Flash forward 2-3 days later, you could be on a 7, you could be on an 8, and that's the nature of life. That's the nature of our bodies. It's up and down. Homeostasis is trying to create a balance for us, and that's the exact same with psychology. We're always trying to do that. So the importance for athletes, let's call them elite athletes for the purpose of this, they need to have that power to press pause, because they need to reflect on what's going on around them. And I think great that you're saying it. Like, what is going to be the difference? If you're let go, what happens next? What's your support system like? What are you doing? What's your coping mechanisms? And that's a really key thing. And I think the best sports psychs, you know, again, you say it kind of kidding, but the best sports psychs, we're constantly trying to make ourselves redundant. We're constantly trying to upskill our athletes, our clients, so that at a stage they go, I have all these coping mechanisms. I don't need to go and speak to James anymore. I can. And I have clients who've maybe 3, 4, 5 years, which is perfect. And it's a healthy thing. They come and they see me. But there's other clients that I've had who've come, they've built up their coping mechanisms, and, you know, off they go, and they're perfectly fit. They go back to the basics and their principles, what they do. And I think it's a really important point that you made there about being able to, you know, come back from the defeat. And so hopefully we'll get to chat about resilience, because it's one of them topics within sports psychology that's fascinating.
We'll dive into it on resilience, because that's one of the big things that I've seen, especially in Ireland, I have to say. I think it's probably commonly known we never use the word elite in any of our sessions for any kid or anything that's under 18, really. The only, like, in my opinion, definitely elite is only when you are, let's say, making a professional wage and you are at the top of that sort of level. But anyway, long story short, one of the biggest problems that I find in Ireland is players who are consistently in, let's say, League of Ireland Academy squad, they're winning every single week. It's a different ball game when they make the jump to UK academies, especially because the talent pool gets much bigger. So A, imposter syndrome kicks in straight away. B, they're not playing minutes, which they've never experienced before. And C, they're losing with zero support systems around. Where do players find resilience? Is it something that's internal through a support system, or a combination of both?
Yeah, it's multifaceted. So let's start there, but let's come back to the first thing.
Yeah.
It is, and look, I mean, again, for me, it's really important. There's no such thing as an elite kid. Kid is a kid, child is a child. I have a couple of friends who we chat about this regularly, and we're seeing these camps and elite this, and it's fine in a marketing sense and all the rest of it. But what you said there initially is really, really important. It's like, how can you classify a kid as elite? Like, we could jump into the Michael, all these kids who probably would have got, no opportunity to be elite at certain ages due to different things, growth, maturation, etc. So actually what we see is there has to be a space for everybody. It's something we alluded to, we spoke about yesterday. Going into resilience then, the thing about resilience is, and I'll just give you a little bit of a personal insight there. So I had a client who was seen for maybe 2 months, and in one of the sessions, we're like, oh God, everything is, you've got everything together. Your days are so structured. You've got great organisation, and I kind of said, listen, I said, I lost both my parents within the space of 5 years. My dad was my hero. My mum was my rock. So really, for me, I only learned resilience through personal grief. I had huge sacrifice, and that's something that you go through daily. So it's like, you've got all of these coping mechanisms, you deal with it, but actually the really interesting thing with resilience is, a lot of the time you have to have something that goes bad in your life for you to illustrate it. You have to have something to go wrong to actually say, right, I've bounced back from this, or I've had the opportunity to do that. And I think that's the example there, is like the players inevitably who will go on to have a career. And remember, there's lots of uses of the word career within sport.
No
Coaches such as yourselves, fantastic. Getting to do what you love to do, amazing. Some people want to go on and be players, and fantastic. And then you've got people like, I had a conversation yesterday with Morgan about this, and I think I was saying, I had a client 3.5 years ago who was 16 and told me that they came back from the UK and that they were a failure. And I was saying, what's wrong with sport? What's wrong with society that we're allowing this? 15 at the time, but 16 a couple of weeks later, and was saying, I'm a failure. And I'm thinking, something's wrong there. Something is wrong fundamentally. And that's where we need to be educating kids, really young age. Forget about your maths has its place and all the rest, but let's teach them coping mechanisms. Let's teach them psychology. Let's give them an insight into these things as well, and how to build resilience. Not just a case of, well, things inevitably go wrong and, stiff upper lip and you have to be strong and, this alpha stuff and all that. Just perpetuates it.
What are the coping mechanisms to do with resilience?
So for me, I would always say, I was at a national governing body conference, I'm going to say it was 3 or 4 years ago, possibly even longer. I think I was saying this, and somebody was saying, the thing with children is they don't get anxious, or they don't have anxiety or stuff like that. A friend of mine, colleague of mine, lecturer in one of the big universities here in the country, the two of us were kind of thrown back by this. We actually ended up leaving the conference. But kids are like us, but they don't have the coping mechanism. So let's say, Gary, me and you are friends. We have a bad day. I know I can call him up. Let's go to the cinema. Let's go for a jog. Let's go to the gym. We might go for a bit of food after, have a chat. That's a coping mechanism. So you alluded to it earlier. It might be our social support network. So clubs and different organisations are putting it into place. And you see it all the time. This organisation allowed me to go and get, see a sports psychologist or whatever it is. But I have to be honest with you and say there's caveats to that. There's these little small terms and conditions. And the reality behind that is, we'll pay for the first 4 and then you have to pay for the rest. And the reality there is, you're probably looking at a situation where if somebody's saying you'll be better, or if they're using the word cure, let's say, for example, you're in danger. So you run. And then the flip side of it is, in 4 sessions, you're probably not going to get to where you need to get. And it's, mental skills are like physical skills. They need training. The first time I picked up a pen or a pencil, I couldn't write. I probably still can't write now. I'm a teacher. But I certainly couldn't be as fluent with it as I am now. But mental skills need the same amount of time and effort as the physical ones. And that is the problem. I would call it the Harry Potter scenario, where you have one session with someone, they think you wave your wand and they're going to go out and score 3 hat-tricks in the one game, So it takes that little bit of time. It probably takes 12, 16 sessions, and you're looking to develop these coping mechanisms. whether it be a social coping mechanism, whether it be learning about meditation, mindfulness, some of them type of elements. And let's be honest about it, that doesn't fit for everybody. So the mindfulness, the meditation, it's not for everybody. Whereas some people might like going for a run. Fantastic, that's great. But it's, can you come back to it then and start to maybe dig in a little bit deeper and think, what can I do now to deal with this issue? Because by nature as humans, and one thing Freud got spot on was we tend to repress things that hurt us. So it's easy to repress, and I'll get to that later. But actually, eventually, I'm going to have to deal with it. That's pretty much.
Yeah, amazing. I was in that. I was in that. I was going to say, when it comes to mixing and matching different resilience techniques, so mindfulness is definitely something that I would practice regularly. I do enjoy going for runs. It's kind of like a cocktail of different things. Some days I wake up and I think that's the thing I need to do today, just to kind of get myself to a base level, for example. How would you recommend to young players, or anybody, I suppose, listening? Because I like the way you said it's more so people versus athletes. I'm a big believer in that. And I think the question that I want to ask is, how do people discover these things? Is it just through trial and error? Is it through looking a little bit deeper into what makes them tick? What really is the best practice for people to get this ball going?
I guess it's experience.
Yeah.
I mean, the last thing that I wanted to do this evening was, and any podcast that I've ever been on, is come in with some sort of panacea or silver bullet saying I know the answer to everything. I don't. I make mistakes every single day. We all do. I'm fallible. You know, like I've said, we all have these things. And I think the greatest teacher that we ever have is experience. So it is a little bit of trial and error. You know, again, I had a client who'd gone to therapists, clinical therapists, before they'd come to me. And same thing again, like you've given the example there, they were, you know, try mindfulness, try meditation. And that, it doesn't work for everybody. That's okay. It doesn't work for everybody. And that's where some people go down the exercise route. So we probably have more people, you know, exercise goers now than we've ever had before. And it's probably because they're aware of what it's doing in terms of the mental health side of things. And the kind of analogy that I used with the lads yesterday was that, like, we've got all these pillars of health, and you've got to manage all of them. So you've got your diet and nutrition, you've got your hydration, which is one of them ones that goes missing so often. And obviously, like I've kind of spoke to you previously about, like, the key ingredient that I'm always saying is missing, and my PhD supervisor would allude to this as well, is sleep. Again, it's something we think so many times athletes would come and say, I'm a bad sleeper. I just can't sleep. I have to have Netflix on, and I have to, you know, it's 2 o'clock minimum. And if I get 2 o'clock minimum, 2 a.m. minimum, I'm delighted to get a sleep at that time. But sleep, again, is one of them things that I think you can work at that. There is good elements around sleep hygiene and the things that we can do to help us get closer to sleep. And when we see it now, and I've probably gone a little bit off topic with this, but it's one of my pet hates is, like, and fair play to the people that have them, but, like, so many people are going, recovery room this, recovery room that, I get my ice bath here, and, you know, all the rest of it. And it can be useful. It can be useful. But the way I'd best explain it is, it's like, if you're talking about actual recovery with elite level athletes, you buy an iPhone and you get the charger that comes with the phone, and you stick that in, and you know by the time you wake up the next morning, that 4 or 5 hours of that charging on that is going to have you full and ready to go the next day. You go into a little Euro shop or whatever it is and you buy one of them chargers, that's like the recovery rooms and all. It might get you a couple of extra percent, which is fantastic, but the reality behind it is good sleep will be all of them other things. Yeah. Good sleep all the time will be all of them things. 150%.
It's interesting because I didn't realise, probably until talking to you yesterday, and then when I re-listened to that podcast, the Sports Psych Show, and when you talked about hydration at, like, a molecular level, and I was just baffled. I was like, wow, that's just such a, how would you even say? It just mind blown to me. I was like, wow, when I heard that, I was like, okay, so hydration is, like, you always kind of just say as a coach, hydrate and sleep and this and that and the other. But when you hear it nearly at the, like, molecular level that you were explaining, I was like, wow, that just, like, blew my mind. I was like, Jesus, that was like next level. Very interesting.
I think the thing with hydration and all of them things as well is, like, you guys are exposing a lot of the kind of new things to young players all the time, which is amazing. And there's that side of it. There's the sports science, there's the molecular level, there's going to the chemical level is amazing. And then there's the, how am I going to get to an 11-year-old, a 12-year-old?
Yeah.
So you show them the clip of Ronaldo saying agua instead of the Coca-Cola. You're like, listen, if Ronaldo's saying water, you know, it's and we joke about it as well in sports. Like sometimes you're having to give these kind of modeled answers or examples. And I'd often say to it, it's the magic water, you know, Space Jam. So if you think of Space Jam, the magic water, geez, drink the magic water, and all of a sudden people start to believe it and buy into it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be sometimes the element, and it's all about your ability to communicate that to people from different walks of life and different ages, which you have to do all the time.
Yeah, no doubt. Every person is so different. Every child is so different. That's definitely a thing in coaching that we find is just because we would go straight from, like I had an under 6, under 9 group today, and then you're going to a one-on-one with the League of Ireland player, which is an entirely different conversation. I mean, there's some, Morgan's always slagging me as well, and Gary suppose. There's some conversations where we'd have a 60-minute session. I'd be chatting for 20 minutes of it because players need to get things off their chest sometimes, like adult players. Whereas kids just say, where's the bag of footballs? Just let's go. I don't care what you have to say. And that's absolutely fine. Whereas like, I think like the old like controlling, and this is kind of like a journey that I suppose we've always gone through all the time. It's just like, although we're like all in our 20s as coaches, we've always molded every single like day to a different version of us with these sorts of communication methods. And I think even just by exposing ourselves to conversations with people like you, for example, and being able to learn from all these different routes, it's kind of like that gradual exposure to like meditation, running, like what is the fit? And I think the big thing though that's common amongst all of it is just being really aware of what's aiding the player, what's negatively affecting it, and is it because of my internal issues that I'm reflecting through poor communication, frustration, for example. And I think it's very interesting when you were talking there earlier about really putting a focus on, you know, what are the things that I can control? My diet, my sleep, my recovery methods, I wouldn't say coping mechanisms, and just being really aware with that. But why do you think there's still a stigma for, especially I would say professional footballers, when it comes to talking to a sports psych or even a clinical psychologist, for example?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. It's one that's changing. The dynamic is certainly changing, I would say. I will give you an example in terms of a rugby team that I'm working with at the moment, and have done for 3 to 4 years now. So we'd have certain training kind of sessions weekly, bi-weekly, let's say, for example. And I would be the sports psychologist working with the team. So I'd be there, be on site, everything else. No problem. Player wants to come and speak to me. No issues there, whatever it is. But players who are based there will contact me and want to see me at my office, which is 20, 25 miles away from where they're based. So 100% absolutely spot on there what you're saying in terms of the stigma still being there and existing. I think the problem with it is that it's still kind of seen as a weakness. And one of the real myths with sports psychologists and the work that sports psych practitioners do all over the world is that, you know, if something's wrong, go and have a conversation with James. Go and have a chat with James. Something wrong, you're not feeling great, go and have a chat with you. Whereas what I alluded to at the start is probably more important. It's actually a performance-based thing. So when things are going right, maybe come and see the sports psych and say, look, I'm looking to adapt my game or develop my game. And, you know, sports psychs usually will have some understanding of the game as well. So I had a conversation with a mentor of mine 6 years ago and was saying, look, sorry, like you're involved in different sports, which is fine, but actually soccer is the sport that you love. So why not go and do coaching badges as well, making sure that you have them. Now, I had a number of them at the time, but I think the exposure for me is that having an A license and being involved in soccer as well, it means that you can actually be a performance-based sports psych as well. So people are talking to you about, I'm not in the team, you can actually give them advice on that. Now, the caveat to that then again is that you have to have a coach who's okay with that, and you have to have somebody who's really secure. And I've been really lucky. I really genuinely mean that. I've been really lucky within all different facets of sports, even with soccer with Andy at UCD. It's like somebody has to be very, very okay in their own skin and comfortable and content with themselves to have a sports psych there. Because inevitably, if players aren't playing and they're a little bit pissed off, chances are they're going to the sports psych to have a little go with the coach. And as I said, I've been lucky where I've never once had a question about, has that player gone and seen you? Has he said that? And has she said something about me? Or she? And that's genuine. Look, I really mean that. Whereas I see young sports psychs now working with coaches and stuff, and I'm like, the boundaries that we have to set for ourselves are so rigorous. The Psychological Society of Ireland, the British Psychological Society, they're rigid with their boundaries that we have to set in terms of confidentiality. So you really need to have a coach that's supportive, that is really comfortable in their own skin, and that trusts you to do a really good job. So maybe I would say the stigma there is still in existence, but that's where people like myself need to get out there and say, this is to improve you. This isn't for me to come in and say, listen, everything will be all right and I'll give you a couple of coping mechanisms. This is for me to say, so you're a striker, let's work on your concentration when the ball isn't with you, or you aren't in possession. What's your movement like there? So you can actually have a lot of specific things to even specific positions that you can do. And I would say the biggest thing that also collectively as sports psychs need to do world over is get rid of that myth that it's only a negative thing, and that actually start going to see a sports psych to develop your game in a really positive way, because that's where I suppose the industry should be going, or certainly hopes to. And look, the last thing on that is 12 years ago, I was working with a League of Ireland team, fairly prominent League of Ireland team, and it was just that I was working with them and the players would be sent to see me. And even that doesn't sound great, does it? Maybe that's just me, but sent to see the sports. So they're coming, maybe not even wanting to sometimes. So you can imagine that conversation, you know, trying to get them to converse when maybe they're not. And look, that's part of the role as well. You have to build rapport and you have to build a relationship before people are going to communicate. And in that role, again, new into the industry, I felt like I had to take that job. It was a big club and the chance might pass me by, and if I didn't. But when I look back on it now and I'm thinking, sports psychs the world over are now saying integrative process. You have to be integrative, because actually what was happening was you were having the sports psychs where they're on the Braveheart speeches. So you wouldn't be part of a team and they'd get to a cup final all of a sudden.
In you come.
Ring, ring, James, can you do a conversation with the lads? We have a final on Sunday. We just need to, make sure that they're in the right mind frame and all this kind of codswallop and all the rest of it. And again, young practitioners are probably in a position where they can't say, no, it's paid work and they're going in. But you're saying to players, look, you need to do this and you need to run through a wall for the team. They're saying, where were you in October when we were doing a training session in the lashing rain? Where were you? You weren't part of this. Whereas the integrated approach now is, if you're talking to somebody, you're like, remember we were 6 hours on that bus and we got home, but done well that night, and that's built resilience. We're ready to go now.
You can even see that with strength and conditioning coaches. Like, it used to be a thing where you go in the gym and do this. Now they're on the pitch, they do the warm. Like, there has to be that way going forward. And when you come back to the start of the conversation, you asked us, we gave you roundabout answers for percentages, but if we believe, let's say 75-80% is psychological, then like everybody always comes to us asking, how can I improve this in my game? And like that, a coach will go, you need to work on your left foot. You need to, so players will search for, I need to get quicker, I need to go to the gym, I need to run, I need to get better with this foot, I need to go do technical work. Whereas, like you said, when things are going well, how many players go, like, I'm a centre forward, I get 20 chances a game, but I'm not putting a lot of them away. How can I improve that? And it's hopefully, like you said, that more integrated model, and just it's becoming less of a stigma, that it's just another element to your training and your development. It has to be seen as a positive, to be honest.
Yeah, listen, I mean, that's it makes me comfortable knowing that there's coaches who are self-aware, who are out there, who are thinking that way, because that's what this process is all about. It's if a sports psych is going to be integrated, then actually what you'll see is 9 times out of 10, let's say an injured player, for example. So you'd have the physio's role, who's a major big role within it. Player gets an ACL and is out for maybe 11 months. The physio is a major role. They're probably going to be seeing them a lot. The sports psych is a role, the S&C, the coach, the manager, all of these different. So it's a real integrative approach. And actually, the thing that goes missing a lot of the time is the return to play protocol that we'd have within psychology. So you'd have a return to play protocol for physiological injuries, But 9 times out of 10, and listen, but hopefully you haven't been in a situation, but most people who've had an injury who's listening to this will know the physiological side of it is probably hard. I have to go to the gym and rehab and all the rest of it. But actually, the psychological side of it is massive.
Yeah.
It's the time away from the lads. It's not being on the bus. It's not going for the meal before the game. You know, you're not going to training. And all of a sudden, you're losing a little bit of identity. And we spoke about this yesterday. It's so important that people explore it. I was joking about it, but it's so true. So many times I say to a player, like, look, you're injured. You know, what you're going to do the weekend for enjoyment, you need to get something. Yeah, I might go and watch a match, you know. And you're kind of going, something may be different because inevitably, and look, you play, everybody's played. It's like, even now you're watching a match, I think, oh, if you just open up there, you could play what you, and all of a sudden, before you know, I'm back in that and I'm talking about what I'd do as a player, what could I, you know, what would be past be like if I just opened and played the other side. So I would say you have to build up a repertoire of things that you enjoy doing outside of that. And sometimes that's another sport, which is fine because, you know, we are creatures of habit. We love routine. We're like most mammals, so we love routine. So it's really good for us. It gives us that balance and equilibrium that we're searching for daily. But actually, on the flip side of that, what we need to be really conscious of is that we're not just completely engrossed in it. And look, there are going to be people who are thinking, oh, this fella's full of whatever. And that's fine. But I have to say, the problem with the perpetuation is with young players now is you have to be obsessed. And that is a dangerous place because what happens is they're obsessed. And if I'm obsessed, I'm overtraining. I'm overtraining. Chances are my increase of injuries going up 20, 30%. All of a sudden, the obsessed player who's putting in all them extra hours that we see on the ads and Sky Sports and the Monday, you're injured. You're out of the game. What are you now? Well, I'm still James, but I'm not the footballer anymore. So what do I do? I need to explore. And listen, to be fair to the thing I love about the UCD model, going back to my current role, is that like you might have players who are injured, but actually they're actually going to come out with a degree at the end of this. So they have another role to go away from. Maybe they'll have a career in football, as we're saying, who are, you know, alluding to that side of it. But actually, the great thing is that you have education to fall back on. And that's so vitally important. I would be saying that to every client that I have, find something away from the sport if you can. And I'm like you, is it go home and watch a match, watch it all day, coach, do all the same things, but you have to find them little areas outside it. Them little areas, that's life.
I was going to ask, because did we chat about it on the podcast where we were talking about that idea of going all in on something like that obsessed kind of side of things, or the opposite where like I presume our philosophy, should I say, is very like people before player kind of thing, or person before player. And again, like you said, the examples you see are the top players who always say they're obsessed and all, but you don't really see what's the damage around that. Like there could be 100,000 people going for that and one person makes it, and we see that one person. And again, it's tough because that model is always what you see on the TV. You have to be this, you have to be that. And then, like I said, our philosophy is very person-centered. It's trying to, again, talk to, like Gary said, some one-on-ones will come in and you could be talking to them for 20 minutes about stuff not even related to football at times, and you're just trying to talk to them about, like, look, there's other things, although you love this and you like this, there's other things to football and life. And then you made a real good point talking about you find you go through phases where sometimes you're like, you love it and you're obsessed, but then there's other times you're like, right, I've just got to do my work, and then I like having something else to kind of bounce between. So it's an interesting debate because we were only chatting about it like a few weeks ago.
It was on Instagram. It was between me and Morgan is where it was.
Was it on Instagram?
Yeah,
that's where it was. I thought it was in here. Yeah,
no,
yeah.
Everything happens.
Yeah,
but honestly, it is.
I see these that much. You don't know where to conversate. It's either in person, Instagram, WhatsApp, on a phone.
Yeah, no, but it's a real personal conversation. But you're spot on there. I always find about obsession, James, there's some days where I will happily work 15-hour days with Training121 or my full-time role. I will dive in. I will not talk to anybody, bar the two lads in Finn, for example, and I'll be content with that. And there's some days where I can't stand the thought of work. And I think again, it's like full cycle back to what we were saying earlier. Self-awareness is the key to a fulfilling life, I think. Understanding when to put the pause button on and really having an understanding of taking a breath and going, this is not what I want to do today. Now, there is some times where I think you need to push through the boundary of, I don't want to do this, but it's important. And really on a psychological level, Is there anything that you see that would be particularly dangerous that young players are doing regularly that they're not paying attention to?
It's interesting. I suppose there has to be that area for players to be able to do extra. Absolutely, there has to be. But there has to be a level where I would often say now, and again, going back to a couple of friends where we'd be chatting daily about this sort of stuff, is like there has to be a space for a child to be able to be developing into maybe going across to England or having a contract or playing National League here. But there has to be that space where they can be a child as well, and they can mess around and do silly things and go to sleepovers and go on holidays, which we had a chat about earlier as well. So kids need to be kids as well. I think the reality behind it is, and you know, apologies, not sorry to the parents who are listening to this, but like a lot of the time, let's be honest, it can be that external pressure that's coming from a parent. And that's probably the danger that comes with it as well. Whereas you see in other sports, there probably is parental pressure, which is normal, which again, there's elements that you can get past or whatever it is. But I think really when we get to the stage of vicarious living where somebody tried to be a footballer and they didn't make it, so now they want their kid to be, and they're bringing them and they're constantly... And the worry for me with it all is, and you guys will be experts at this, if you already aren't, you will spot a million miles off about a parent who's there and thinking, yeah, keep going with the lads and they'll be going across to Man City in 2 years or whatever it is. And the parents are the ones, because they're the ones that they're, you know, drip feeding it from and learning from.
The most contact time with them as well, which you kind of forget. Like,
absolutely.
We only have 1 or 2 hours a week with them, but
yeah, and it's
so
again,
much more to parents.
Going back to one of the most famous psychological experiments, the Bobadal experiment by Albert Bandura. It was this 5-foot inflatable doll. A child was watching through a perspex glass, and an adult walked in on the other side of it and picked up a wooden mallet, and there was just this doll. And when the parent or the person, the adult, hit the doll with the actual mallet, I think it was like 91% of the kids that went into that room after them mimicked the actual action.
Jesus.
So we will often say the reality behind things is that kids will actually mimic behavior more so than words. And again, you know, yesterday we were chatting about this, and it's, you know, we have to be careful with parents and everything else, because it's, you know, do as I say, not do as I do. And that again there can be a danger within that. But I don't see a trend of danger for them in general. But I would say you'd always have to be aware if a child is, and you'll see it with the sessions. If a child is usually extremely energetic and they're going into sessions, and then all of a sudden you might know, Jesus, look, it might be a situation where they take a week off, or they because look, burnout again, it's something that's very real, and that happens to athletes quite often. And your example of it there is really good. Working a 15-hour day and being able to enjoy it, really good if you can do that. And then there are going to be the times where you do need to just say, look, I need time away from this. And for me, that comes back to reflection, the power of being able to reflect and have that awareness within your day-to-day life. You know, press and pause, as I say.
Just on the kind of the parent topic, because I think this could be quite educational, because some parents probably would see what they do as being massively supportive just because they might be uneducated in, like, what kind of small tips would you give to I suppose parenting an up and coming player, so to speak, or even a kid who's at a good level of football, who could potentially go on, but also, like we know with football, the chances are quite slim. So was there any kind of little bits of advice you give on how to kind of handle that situation?
For me, like, I have a really good friend, Alan Bourne, his name is, and he's just amazing with these. He was director of football at a local club here for over 10 years, but he's so good with the whole parent-child thing and could give you a million better things than I ever could. But the one for me would be, it's really important for them to take a deep breath and one big step back. When everything's going on, just having that ability to step away. Yeah, and listen, for me, it's easy to sit here and say that. I had a situation, like I said to you, my dad was my hero. I was playing, I think we were in the All-Ireland of a game when we were 16 or something like that, and the coach ended up going to a different team or whatever, and one of the parents jumped in to take the team. So we had no coach. There was no game. If you hadn't got a parent to run it, you would forget about your cups and thinking you're playing the Champions League final when it's an All-Ireland under-16s game. And we done a session or something. We're coming out then, of course, 16-year-old me thinking I know everything and all the rest. And says, you know, am I allowed course, by the way, just in case?
Of course.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I was just, load of shit. And my dad, boom, no way. Just said, hang on 1 minute now. He said, listen, from now until the rest of your life, take this on board. He's a volunteer. He's given up his time. And I think the really important thing there is that we have to be really hyper vigilant in this country, that we have volunteers in positions, whether it's National League or it's Leicester Senior League or wherever it is, and our expectation is paid employee, excuse me. So we're expecting this output from somebody that they're qualified and they have a UEFA B or a UEFA A, but actually on the other side of it, where's the financial remuneration for them? So parents maybe think again, right, okay, we've got a really good coach here. They have got the qualifications, whatever it may be, but realise that 90% of us here in this country are volunteers. And I think that can often alleviate that little bit of kind of, my kid should be doing this and my kid can be, and we can support in different ways. You can support at arm's length. And I think the key for the coach more so than anything is, before anything, every pre-season, before you go doing anything, just group meeting. This is the way it's going to work. This is my working style. This is my philosophy, my ethos. If it's not for you, if it doesn't suit you, that's the way it is. And I think the problem is playing time. And parents will always want their kids to play, and it's age dependent as well. So I think, look, the best thing parents can do is just trust the coaches. A lot of the time, the coaches, if they are going back to my own example with my dad, it's like, if they're a volunteer and they're giving up their time, respect that, you know, and I think parents can learn a lot from that example as well.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And even that's just good life lessons. Just awareness of, you know, even just pessimism versus optimism. You know, you might have lost your coach, but at the same time, some guys stepped up here, some girls stepped up here and could potentially change your life. You don't know what knowledge they have. And just having the ability just to say, okay, this is actually great. One thing that Gary, to be fair, does really well in UCD as well is they have a parental code of conduct as well, which just essentially outlines the backbone of it. But again, I think even just for coaches that listen to this as well, you know, sometimes there is parents and other external factors that are quote unquote out to get you, let's say, for whatever lack of reasons, for anything. And I think having a good code of conduct, like a sports psyche's boundaries, is a really good way to keep that connection there. And I think parents forget that parents are parents and coaches are coaches. And when a kid is struggling to deal with the aspects of football and trying to build their resilience, I think that's where parents can really come in as a helping hand. Because when kids are fearing football, let's say they're fearing not playing, they've got anxiety that somebody's taking their position and they're going to get dropped, for example, especially in National League clubs, you hear some horror stories. The parent needs to step in there and be the parent and allow that child to be vulnerable, especially if the parent is causing the pressure. The child has nowhere to go, I think, at an emotional level. They can't pick up the phone and ring a sports psych. They can't pick up and go to a clinical psychologist. All they have is their friend group or their parents. You know, I think parents, you know, I think if they could really just take a parental view on it rather than, you know, this is going to be your career, for example. It's a tricky one, isn't it?
I think on it, and not to be too parent, I don't want us to come across parent bashing from a coaching point of view.
Yeah, absolutely.
I find, like you said, if you set boundaries on here's the process, here's how this is going to work. If you're not happy with something, grand, we can have a chat and here's how it works. Like one of the things we'd have, and again, one of the things I learned from Foxy quite well, he's good with, you know, Foxy always has lists and he's very organised. Shane Lars will love that one. Loves slagging Foxy's organisation. But very like game day, no conversation. He's like, emotion's too high for everybody. If your kid hasn't played what you think he should have, whatever, you're gonna come aggressive, and everybody's tired after the game. So it's like, have a chat on him before training, and just have a text. Can I chat to you 10 minutes before training? Grant. And honestly, I could count on 2 or 3 fingers the amount of issues I've had in 6 years. Like, and not even issues. It's just parent thinks something, you think another thing, and you have that conversation, and by the end of it, it's always fine. And you know, when you just set that boundary of they know they can come to you in this way and have this conversation. And look, and this, I actually say this to players I work with now who are like 16, 17. You might have an opinion on something we do on the pitch, and you might come to me and go, I think we should do this. And I'll go, look, I'm going to use my coaching experience and I think we should do this. It's great that you can come and have this conversation with me, but sometimes I'll go with what you're saying, but sometimes I'll just go with what I'm going to say. And you've sometimes got to accept that. You can give me an opinion, and I'm not just going to change it just because you've given it. But you can feel like I've said my piece. He's listened to it. He's taken it on board, or he hasn't. But that's again part of life. Is sometimes you're going to give your opinion to someone, and they're like, it's up to, like, Gary doesn't have to take anything I say and believe it. He can just go, I think you're talking nonsense, and that's just
the
part of life.
The key there, and I think of healthy coaching environments are, we're joking about what is a high performance environment. Let's say, for example, it's a really state of the art gym, is having sports like, exposure to S&C, whatever it is. But I think, you have to have an open line of communication. So the fact that you're saying that kids can even come and speak to you, fantastic. They may have ideas and constructs around what they think is right as a coaching session or whatever it is, as you're saying. And that's fine to take that in. And maybe one of the times you might go, he's not too wrong there. Maybe
they can be right, to be fair to them.
Exactly. And you can never, and look, you mentioned it earlier about Gary, about vulnerability, and it's key. I think we need to show people that we're fallible. I think we need to be honest and open and say, like I've said earlier, like, we get things wrong all the time. But you can still have authentic leadership and do that. And I think that's what makes the leadership authentic. I mean, I'm joking about the high performance thing. If you think of Damien Hughes, so Damien Hughes wrote a book, The Barcelona Way, which I'm sure you've probably all read. Yeah. But one of the interesting things that he mentions within it is authentic leadership, and how do you gain that? And one of the key constructs of it is vulnerability. And I think sometimes it's probably a good thing to stand back and go, yeah, I was wrong. And maybe you were right, or whatever it is. And I would 100%, I've said this all the time, I respect somebody so much more if they can say, I got that wrong, rather than being pig-nosed and saying, no, it was right, and it was just that you're wrong. And, I heard a really good phrase last week. Somebody was talking coaching sense to me, and they were saying, you could be giving advice to Mourinho about a coaching session. He could tell you completely wrong. But the same advice you're giving to Pep, and he might be saying, amazing, that's fantastic. So as you were saying, coaching is multifaceted. Life is multifaceted. Everybody is different. They might go, oh, well, James is a terrible coach. Why? Well, doesn't want to play this system, not really interested in that for me. Okay, that's fine. Whereas they might go, well, Gary plays the same as me, and I have a bias towards it now because I love a 3-5-2 system. So coaches will have that, and people will have it. And, the thing is in society, and it's taken me a long time to get it. So you might meet somebody and you don't want to be one of these people, ... But so they say, oh, do you know Gary? Yeah, he's a great guy, ... But he's not good at this, or whatever it is. So we need to pull ourselves away from that and just be able to go, great coach, gives up his time, really good guy, good. And I feel we can learn so much when we take away the ... But when we're mentioning people, or when we're talking about people. Yeah. It's just easy to get caught in that.
No doubt. It is, to be fair, it's only when you think of it.
On the topic of authenticity, where does the line cross? Because one example would be for Cristiano Ronaldo, for example, gets taken off in one of the last games for Manchester United, walks out of the dressing room, or walks down the tunnel by himself and goes on an interview with Piers Morgan, which is, to be honest, is fully authentic to what he believes. But that pissed a lot of people off. Whereas I kind of looked at Ronaldo and said, I don't know, like, is pure authenticity not what we all want in people? There's no bullshit with Ronaldo. Where does the line cross, do you think?
I think it's a fantastic example, and it's a great question. I actually, just going back to what I just said, I don't really know what the answer is. I really don't. I think, as you're saying, the situation, like, it's that whole thing, my side, your side, and the truth. And inevitably, it's just which way the story's being told from. Obviously, Cristiano was probably believing I've been betrayed by the club. I've come back here to try and save you. I've done all of this. I've been treated terribly. I've had, a lot of stuff around it. And look, don't need to get into it here or whatever, but you're talking about a situation where we're talking about elite athletes versus person first, elite athletes.
Of course, yes.
Cristiano's dealing with a huge trauma, the loss of a child. I can't imagine what that would feel like. I'm not sure if anybody will ever until they're in that situation. Yeah. So it's easy to cast aspersions and say, he should have done this and he should have done that. But actually, trauma is really, really one of them things that there's plenty of books on it, but actually there's no manual. There is no manual to deal
very
with
well
trauma.
said. Yeah,
There's
very
no,
well said.
There's no manual. So that would be with the authenticity thing. Would be my line, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. Because I see it all the time on Twitter and LinkedIn, and like even a good example of that would be Djokovic not getting vaccinated to go to Australia, for example. Some people are like that is authentic to the bone. Some people are like that is so disrespectful to the rules of the game and all that sort of stuff. And again, I'm kind of like on the fence. I'm kind of taking more of like an empathetic side. Like I don't know exactly what this guy's been through. I don't know exactly what the circumstances are. You just never know the full story with people, do you? And that's even at the elite performance level, like the Cristianos of this world, or the amateur grassroots players. You just never know what's going on behind closed doors.
Yeah, and the for me, I would be always inclined to be thinking, so I mentioned earlier, and again talking about authenticity and reality and all the rest of it, I mentioned about losing my parents. So I think 3.5 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, I was on the way to UCD training session, whatever it was, pulled in, boom, just a memory came into my head of my dad, and I think it arrived early enough, so about 5-10 minutes or whatever it was, but I was like, oh, can't catch my breath here. So I was having obviously heart palpitations. I wouldn't call it necessarily a panic attack. I don't like labeling these things, but for me, again, it was like that element brought me back to actually grief and dealing with grief. And you just, so I sat with that because I've a coping mechanism to be able to sit with that. I was lucky enough to do that. And then I was lucky enough to be able to get out, and then you arrive at the session and somebody's taking a piss or you're having a laugh and somebody's like, state your boots, whatever it might be. And that brings you back away from it. And I'm so blessed that I have that, because I've tried to reframe them thoughts around my dad and the memories. And I'm like, actually, hang on a moment. I'm getting transferred back in time to a memory with my dad. So as hard as it was, and it literally took my breath away, I'm actually going, well, I'm still getting to spend time with him in one essence of that. And then it's about taking yourself then to step away if you can, and then you're in a session, and as I was saying, you're able to have the bit of crack or whatever it is. So you just do not know. And we'll always go to that player misplaced the pass because, they don't have respect, or they weren't listening when I was going through the phase of play or whatever it was. That player could be sitting there, their parents might have got divorced, they mightn't have somewhere to stay that night. They might have broke up with their girlfriend. Anything, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it may be. So it's always like you can't as a coach kind of accommodate for all of that and think, Jesus, I better be careful here. But actually, what you can do is just, before going in and steaming in with this is the reason why, maybe just take a couple of steps back and ask the person, how are you? How's things going on with you? And you don't need to be a sports psych to do that. You just need to be a person, and a person who cares. And that's, they'll care more if they know you care.
Yeah, absolutely. What you said there about your dad was beautiful. Like, that is true authenticity. Being able to sit there and understand that feeling is coming to you for a reason. Like, there's no reason to bury that. I think when people think of authenticity, think about like being them true selves and stuff. How about sitting there with an uncomfortable thought, even if it's something that you regret, if it's grief, for example, it could even be ecstatic. Like, it could be like pure joy over something. But how many times do people just put it under the carpet? You're like comfortably numb with how life goes on, I just think it's always fascinating. Like, I can never put a finger on it. Like sometimes I kick myself going, geez, like I wasn't present there, or like I was very present there. It's kind of like you're ticking boxes all the time. Like, oh, I should be this person all the time. I should have this identity.
Yeah. Look, again, what I'd say is, if, you're probably going to have to edit all this, because reality, we're turning into a psychology kind of lecture. But, the work of Sigmund Freud, right? Largely discredit. If I was to say, right, close your eyes, think of a psychologist, the kind of generic thing people go to, bearded man, cigar, Sigmund Freud, right? So everybody would have that opinion, psychologist, whatever it is. A lot of Freud's work largely discredited. But as I said earlier, a lot of the really good stuff that Freud done was around repression. So we probably think, repression, I'm not repressing thoughts, or I'm not repressing ideas, or whatever it is. But actually what we do a lot of the time is we repress things that make us uncomfortable. And sometimes it's, when I was studying initially, it was fight or flight. So then it was fight, flight or freeze. And now it's fight, flight or fawn. So you can stay and fight, you can run away, you can freeze in the moment, or you can fawn and try to be really nice to the person and, placate them or whatever it is. But the repression part is something that's probably really normal for us all. is that when something makes us really uncomfortable, we'll go off and do something else. But if it's a really big thing, it's going to come back. So eventually, as you're saying, can I be present to sit here with something that's made me uncomfortable? And after a time that dissipates, or we begin to, and it might be always sitting with you. Might be, if it's a big thing, you know, clients in the past who've dealt with massive traumas, you know, physical, sexual abuse, let's say. And sometimes it's there, and sometimes you have to sit with it, and it's difficult. And sometimes it's a situation where you're present, but I can get on with things now, and I know what I'm doing as well. So it is about maintaining and being present, and then also saying, right, it's okay not to be okay, but now I'm going to make sure that I'm okay tomorrow. So what can I do? Going back to the pillars of health, you know, my food, my diet, my nutrition, my sleep, and maintaining them. And you know, the social element of that is really big as well. Going out with my friends, going to cinema, going for a drink, whatever it may be. So there's plenty of them coping mechanisms that we have.
Similar to what you asked us in terms of how much the psychological makes up the football, the pillars you mentioned there, and the percentage back in you, how many kind of people do you chat to, or clients, and one of them pillars is the thing that's off? Is that kind of a higher percentage maybe that we would think?
I think the way that I would describe it is it's like a house, and you have your diet here, your activity, your nutrition, your social there, or whatever it is. But actually, the reality behind that, Gary, is that if this foundation, which is our mental health, if that one is off, you can forget about these being stable. Okay. So you could have one of these pillars that's a little bit wobbly, and you know, I'm going down the road and all of a sudden I'm in KFC or Burger King or McDonald's, and me nutrition isn't great. Okay, that's a little bit wobbly. But if it's the mental health side of things and that's off, you can guarantee that that's going to wobble the rest. Because the first thing that we inevitably do when we're low in mood is we probably may not eat because we've got anxiety, and then when we become so starved that we want to eat, we go for really high calorie dense food, so tends to be fatty stuff like a McDonald's, whatever it may be, and then when we do that, then probably feel fatigued after, whatever it is, sugar rush, and then inevitably you're not going to want to train if you're feeling low, your mood is low. So I would say the mental health is the one that you have to work on, but the other pillars that you have around that actually makes that stronger. So if that is a little bit difficult, and there are some situations where people are dealing with psychiatric issues, where there's psychosis and there is a need for medicine. But there are situations where I would believe, and I'm a strong believer in this, and probably get absolutely hammered by academics for it, but you know, medicine is overly prescribed for them things when we haven't tried exercise, when we haven't tried diet, when we haven't tried socialization, when we haven't tried looking at our hydration, and we haven't tried looking at our sleep, when we haven't looked at the pillars of health and we're prescribing something to somebody. And look, there's means and ways for that, and we could talk till the cows come home on it. But actually, I think looking at all them things, if you do all of them, and even if you are still feeling that little bit lower, chances are you're feeling a lot better than you did. And if you think about, you go to the gym, you have a day, you go out with your friend, you spend energy-wise, by the time you come home, you might still have that little bit of anxiety, which is normal. But chances are your energy levels are so low that you're going to sleep, or you hope to sleep. Yeah. And then if you can get a good sleep, you know, the next day you wake up and, you know yourself, you wake up and you've had a good sleep, set you up for the whole day then.
No doubt. Even I was saying to Morgan, if my sleep is even a tiny bit off, it's because we're doing so much output at the minute. There's so many hours coaching, and we're still trying to build, you know, a scalable business. Really, like there's so much stimulus day today. If sleep is rocked a tiny bit, mood decreases, then you make poor food choices, and it's exactly what you're saying there. Like that's just real life experience, and that could be for, let's say, you know, high output people, but it could also be for people who are really just struggling to find routine. You know, they just get caught in those negative loops all the time. You know, it's a difficult thing to navigate, you know. And
yeah, sorry.
No,
go ahead. Sorry. No,
I was just literally going to say, like for the day-to-day person, and again, person versus athlete, people over athletes, when it comes to, let's say, the basics of this, do you find that the education on, let's say, the pillars of health, the foundation of mental health, is under talked about, and it's only really coming to, let's say, popular media now?
Yes, I think. Listen, we've got more exposure to it than we've ever had before, but then we've got higher rates of mental health issues than we've ever had before. We've situations where I think a 16-year-old girl in Mayo a couple of years ago was on a waiting list to see a psychologist in the public health system. It was a 14-month wait. So if you think about how bad you might be feeling on a day to day, and then you're hearing, well, before I get some help here, it's going to be 14 to 16 months. It's difficult, and them situations are difficult as well. So I think the pillars of health, they have to be set from the top, and that's why I'm a true believer in it. There's a lady who's done talks before for us in the college called Fiona Foreman, and she does mental health for kids. And people are like, oh, they don't need to be exposed to that. But actually, it's more about kind of being aware of what an emotion is and what's joy versus what's happiness versus what's sad. And maybe exposing them to what actually is sadness rather than waiting for it to hit them and then them going, what is this? I'm crying, I'm upset, or whatever it is. And I think, look, what you come back to there is the reality around sports psychology a lot of time is that word motivation comes up. And I think I certainly was in that group of people who didn't or wasn't aware of the physiological motivation. So you would think about a lot of times, you know, if I'm picking up the water to drink there that's beside me, probably a physiological motivation is because I'm feeling dehydrated or I might be feeling warm. If I'm hungry, the physiological motivation is to eat. So this is why I'm constantly saying to athletes, forget about setting goals before you look at what's your motivation. So again, you know, probably wouldn't put you on the spot here and say, like, what is the motivation for you on a day-to-day process? What is it on a month-to-month? What's your week, or what's your goal, and what's your true aim? What is it that you want? You know, a lot of the time you're speaking to people, oh, look, I'd love to have a few quid, grand. What's next? You know, you think Maslow's hierarchy needs. You have your food, you have your house. What's next? You want that self-actualization. You want to get to a stage where I'm content here. And I really believe that that's something we have to chase daily. I don't think you can reach that because, you know, I think it's Socrates or Plato, the two great tragedies in life. One is not achieving all your goals and the other is achieving all your goals. And what do you do tomorrow?
Yeah. Like, it's spot on, isn't it? Because, God, that's so true. I was only thinking, like, I took a pause a couple of days ago just on, like, always thinking about what's the next thing for Training121. What's the next thing? What's the next venue? What's the next coach? What's the next session? How can we bring value here? And then I was like, hold on a minute. Like, look how far we've came in 3 years. And I'm not, like, blowing horns or anything like that. It was just like, okay, just pause for a minute. We're doing much better. And this is back to your conversation with Dan. I think it was something along the lines of put the bat down and stop beating yourself up. Yeah. I was like, Jesus Christ, that's so true. It's just, again, like you said at the start of the podcast, pause. Like, there's no problem in pausing, analyzing where are the goals. Have you hit them? No, keep going. Have you hit them? Great. What's the next journey?
So again, look, there's a few of the lads obviously off stage here, whatever you call it. Imposter syndrome, does it hit you much?
Yeah, I just thinking of when you asked, like, what motivates daily, I would say I'm very heavily motivated. Motivate's the wrong word, I don't like using that, but I'm very fear-based in the sense of I would worry about this coach is doing this, so I need to keep on top of it essentially. And I would say at the minute I've got a healthy level of that where it's just enough where it's scaring me enough that I got to keep going. Okay. So I would say I'm a bit, that's kind of how I operate currently, I would say.
And when you're saying about what a coach is doing, are you talking about kind of that you need to keep up with maybe their level of education, their level of, or what kind of would you be referring to there? Like,
I would say just in my head, there's other coaches doing things that, and I just need to keep up. Like a player will say, there's someone training, I need to train. Okay. That's probably how I would word it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, look, the reality for young coaches, a lot of the time is it's, you know, alluding to a buddy of mine again earlier and just saying it's like, you know, 10 years ago he said to me, you know, if you want badges, join the Scouts. So you got to be careful running after these UEFA badges. Yeah. And then, like, you do them, and then I was lucky enough I got to present with the English FA at one stage as well, and I was chatting to a couple of them, and they're talking about the differences of the A licenses from the different countries and stuff, and then you can get into the, as you're saying there, the comparisons, and I'm going, is my A license the same as theirs? It's from UEFA, but they're telling me that there's all these different parts of it. So we can do that. And listen, there's no harm in listen, as you're saying, if it is the kind of little bit of fear that's kind of doing that, it's just if that's consumption, if that's consuming you, then that's different. But actually, we'll all have that. We all have that fear of who's going to do this, who's going to take that, what, you know, I need to upscale. Like, you're very young, but even for me, I'm like constantly, how do I upscale? How do I adapt? How do I evolve? What about yourself? Imposter syndrome?
Yeah, imposter syndrome, to be honest, hand on heart, I haven't really experienced it, but I think that's purely because I've always seen coaching as like, I wouldn't say, yeah, I would always consider it as my thing. But I think it was too closely tied to my identity when I was a kid. Like Morgan, me and Morgan are really, like, our brothers were best mates, but Morgan is 10 times better footballer than I was. So I kind of sacrificed that idea of football is like not my thing per se, but coaching is. And I kind of found like a step away from the conversation in like families, like, oh, Morgan, you know, All Ireland final next week. And I was like, I wouldn't say I was like sitting there like, oh, you know, I'm here too. But it's kind of more so like, it's nice to like kind of have my own thing, if that makes sense.
Simpsons thing, can I come too, isn't it? Where what's going on?
Love G.
It is kind of like that. It's kind of like, I kind of have my own thing now. And I've always been very assured in myself coaching from when I was 16 till now. But I think fear kind of filtrates into my system a bit, definitely on a business perspective, I would say. It definitely... Fear is definitely something that gets me up in the morning. Fear of not accomplishing what I want to accomplish. And that's not just in business in general. I suppose if we're on that topic, definitely it would be. There's other supplementary football companies out there that would, let's say, be doing great coaching sessions, etc. And I'm kind of thinking like, you know, the wolf could catch us in that sense. But like, what even is that wolf? It's kind of what the conversation is all the time. But I do think that fear definitely keeps me moving forward. Just fear of more so like not achieving what I want to achieve. And I think what achieving is really, as you said, self-actualization. Just being aware that this is a brand and a company that I'm creating with my two best friends. It doesn't need to have a specific revenue target. It doesn't need to have, you know, 1,001 venues. As long as it's authentic, it can provide a living and more so provide value to our players and our base, then I mean, that's a continuous cycle. I don't think that fear will ever particularly leave, you know?
I was just thinking of it there, and like, you always want to self-improve because, again, from coaching point of view, you can be afraid of like letting players down who you're working with. You always want to be like,
definitely.
what's the most, I don't know, up-to-date research on coaching and learning and this, and like that. I get that it can get to, and it probably will hit me at one stage where it will become maybe too much. I would say currently at the minute, it's probably that nice level. Like you said, it just scares you enough that you keep going. You're always open. You're trying new things. You're looking for new things. And that's, I suppose, a balance, isn't it, at the end of the day?
I would imagine you're the exception to the rule there, because to hear you saying that, you know, your fear is based around not being at a level that you can coach the kids to the best of their ability, let's say, for example, is probably a rarity. And again, it's refreshing to see that that's where your mind's at, rather than thinking, you know, if I do this, then I can get up to this team, or, you know, and that's often thrown at me as well. As like, you know, would you like to go to a different team, or would you like to be with one of the top 10, whatever it is? And it's like, it depends where are the goalposts? What is it that you want to do? You know, I was very specific, like obviously lecturing during the day, that's my bread and butter. You mentioned it there, and it's excellent. And I hope it doesn't come across disingenuous or even arrogant, but it's like, I get up every day because I love my job. I love what I do. Again, coming back to my dad was a genius, and so was my mum, because I was okay in school. Okay, I was okay in school. So second year comes in secondary school, and my mum and dad says, okay, we're going to get your job up in the building providers that was just up the road. No problem, brilliant. Gonna get like, whatever, it was 100 quid a week, thinking, buzzing, you know, get what I want here. I went in, and oh my God, it was the hardest work I ever done in my life. All summer, I remember after 2 days saying to my dad, I can't do this. I can't do it. I was like 6 a.m. I was there, it was welts all over my hand. I was like, I cannot do this. So anyway, flash forward to the end of the summer, go into third year, junior cert year, which is so big and everything. I aced everything because they knew they must have known. They must have had the foresight or the hindsight, whatever, to go, he needs to focus now back on his education. And I got to put my head down and I got to, work hard. And within that then found a love for education, found a passion for it, and actually was lucky to fall into a job, like I said, where I'm teaching. And like you're saying, imposter, people might go, well, would you not like to teach in a Trinity or a university or something? The type of children and college goers that I'm exposed to at the QQI and Pierce College level 6 and level 5 level, they're from all walks of life. So like I was saying yesterday, you get to coach kids who are football for all, you get to coach kids who are National League, and you know what, it's beautiful to see the kind of feelings and emotions that they have after completing something. It's so they're on top of the world because of it. And you just have to channel that feeling because it's amazing.
Question we probably should have started the podcast with: how did you get into psychology? So we obviously kind of stopped there at your junior start. Was it always something from then, or did it just hit you one day? Or
no, I had ideas of grandeur as well. I was like playing and went to USA on a scholarship.
Oh, nice.
Went to Memphis University, which is really it's huge, and was lucky to do that. Came back then and done an undergraduate degree in sports coaching in Waterford. And one of the modules in the year was sports psychology, and it was actually in around, showing me age now, around 2005. So Mourinho was coming onto the scene, and everybody's talking about, the psychology of this, and I was all over. I loved it.
Yeah.
So the masters comes up then in sports psychology, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna be the next Mourinho sort of thing. It just fell into it, and to be honest with you, it's been an absolute life-changing experience because it's made me so vigilant on human behavior and learning about it, and then being aware of like I'm saying, I was talking to a couple of years yesterday around communication and the importance of communication, not what we say, the way we say, etc. And I suppose psychology resonated with me because I'd always say I had some amazing coaches, but I also had some coaches that maybe wouldn't do things that I do, but I learned so much off them because it's stuff that I probably wouldn't do. And psychology has given me a real lens or perspective to be able to see that as well. So yeah, undergraduate, done the postgraduate in sports psychology in 2009, and then obviously he's been a practitioner since, and then went back and done the HDIP as well and the private clinical psych, and currently doing the PhD at the moment, which the topic is around irrational beliefs and sleep. So it's a bi-directional, I'm examining this bi-directional relationship with elite athletes. So my belief is that most people will have irrational beliefs. Sport is probably based off irrational beliefs. Do or die. No, if we lose the game, I go home, I'm alive tomorrow. So a lot of sport is kind of magnified that way. So my kind of research at the moment is trying to find out is it irrational beliefs? If I don't play good tomorrow, I'm going to lose my contract, so I sleep bad? Or is it that I'm having poor sleeps, and because I'm having poor sleep and I'm thinking, oh God, I'm only after getting 4 hours, how am I going to be able to train to the best of my capability today? Is that leading to me having them irrational beliefs going into my session? So hopefully it's something there. And again, you have to, anybody doing research or around, you have to pick something that you're interested in or that you love, because it is hard, very hard.
Yeah, it's 4 years, isn't it?
4 years.
Yeah.
So
Patrick, our health and communications officer, is doing a PhD as well, but he's also doing it, I think, is it I'm not going to botch it, but he is locked in, but he's doing
you'd
it.
have to be,
same as 12, 13 hour days on a topic you love.
What stage are you at with that? Are you
year 2 now, so second year. So I'm at kind of
data collection? Would it be?
Administration and stuff like that of collection. So I'm doing a narrative review first of all as my first paper, and then I'll be doing my own subjective measures paper. So there's an irrational beliefs one by guy Martin Turner, who's he's the supervisor for the PhD as well, University of Manchester, and amazing as well, along with the athletics sleep screening questionnaire. So doing both of them with elite athletes here in Ireland as well, hopefully leading into a third paper where I got to kind of do an intervention.
Nice.
Amazing. And I think just as a concluding note, when it comes to the work in Pearse College, if that was something that was interesting to any young adult that's looking to pursue third level education, how can they get involved with any of the courses that you guys have?
So yeah, they can go on to the Pearse College website, pearsecollege.ie, and there's a level 5 and level 6 that's there within sports coaching, soccer coaching and sports psychology. So it might be your first little inroad to sports psychology. It's something that's growing all the time, and you know, there's a lot of work in it. Sometimes it's work you might need to travel for. Obviously, it's quite big in the UK. It's massive within the US. It has been. You know, you go back 30, 40 years, the likes of John Wooden, massive influence on me. One of my favourite coaches of all time would have been using sports psych all the way back then. So you can think of how far ahead the US are in terms of using sports psychology as opposed to maybe here in Ireland as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing. Because I got into university through a back door, through an arts program. And I think people kind of forget that just because you don't hit, let's say, the arrow through the bullseye, the system, to its credit, does have ways to allow people to get in. But it does require a little bit of resilience, self-awareness, and a willingness to be better every single day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and on that note, I think...
Part 2 definitely at some stage. Morgan's sitting there. Morgan's like, tag me in. Morgan's got questions here. No, thanks for coming on. That was really, really good. Hopefully everyone gets good value from it.
Yeah, no doubt. Thanks a million, James.
Thanks so much, lads. Thank you.